Arizona Territory, 1889. Caleb Morgan found the first stolen horse at the mouth of Copper Ridge Canyon. It stood alone beneath a twisted juniper, trembling so badly that its saddle straps clicked against one another. White foam covered its chest. A broken lead rope dragged between its legs. Caleb dismounted from his bay gelding and approached slowly. Easy. The frightened animal backed toward the canyon wall. Caleb stopped and lowered his hands. He had worked with horses since he was old enough to carry a feed bucket. Fear could not be pulled from an animal. It had to be given room to leave. The horse wore no saddle, but a dark mark had been burned into its right shoulder. Someone had tried to cover the original brand with a second one. The new scar was fresh. Beneath it, Caleb could still see the outline of a red willow branch. He recognized that symbol. The Red Willow Apache community lived nearly 40 miles north of his ranch. Their horses were known throughout the territory for their endurance, intelligence, and ability to cross broken desert ground without losing their footing. A trader in Cedar Crossing had mentioned that several had disappeared. He had not said 200 were missing. Caleb caught the broken rope and tied the animal behind his gelding. Then he studied the canyon. Hundreds of hoofprints covered the dry ground. They were too numerous to belong to a traveling party. Mixed among them were deep wagon tracks and the square impressions of shod freight horses. Caleb should have returned to Hollow Creek Ranch. He had 12 miles of fence to repair before winter. A water pump had failed near his southern pasture. His foreman, Jonas Bell, had warned him not to disappear into another man's trouble. Yet someone had driven a large herd into Copper Ridge and tried to hide where the animals came from. Caleb mounted again. Looks like the fence will have to wait. His gelding flicked one ear back at him. That was not an invitation to judge me. They followed the tracks into the canyon. The sandstone walls narrowed until sunlight became a thin ribbon above them. The air carried the heavy smell of horses. Then Caleb heard them. Not one animal. Hundreds. The sound rolled through the canyon like distant thunder. He reached a high shelf overlooking an abandoned mining basin. Below him, nearly 200 horses crowded behind rough timber fencing. Some were tied in groups. Others moved restlessly through the dust. Several marries stood between armed riders and their young foals. A freight wagon waited beside the southern gate. Branding irons glowed inside a portable forge. 3 men were changing the marks on the horses. Caleb counted 7 armed guards. Possibly more inside the line shack. He was one rancher with a rifle, a revolver, and enough sense to understand that neither weapon could solve the problem. A voice came from behind him. You took a wrong trail. Caleb turned slowly. 3 riders had appeared along the shelf. The man in front wore a black coat too expensive for ranch work. A silver V had been stamped into his saddle. Vane Freight and Cattle. Silas Vane controlled most commercial traffic south of Cedar Crossing. Caleb had never met him. He knew the reputation. Vane purchased land from desperate families and resold it after the railroad increased its value. He never created hardship himself. He simply arrived before anyone else knew hardship was coming. The rider beside him rested a hand near his revolver. These horses belong to Mr. Vane, the man said. Do they? You see another owner? Caleb looked toward the altered brands below. I see someone working hard to hide one. The third rider spat into the dust. You accusing us of stealing? I haven't heard your explanation yet. The man in the black coat smiled. Then allow me. His voice was polished and calm. The Apache abandoned these animals while leaving restricted land. My company recovered them before they became wild. Caleb looked down at the basin. Those horses have been here less than 3 days. The smile faded slightly. How would you know? The marries still have trail dust beneath their bellies. Half the herd has fresh rope burns. And your men are changing brands before the wounds can close. Silas studied him more carefully. You're Caleb Morgan. Caleb did not ask how the man knew his name. I own Hollow Creek Ranch. A modest property. It feeds the people who live there. For now. The words sounded casual. The warning inside them did not. Silas gestured toward the canyon entrance. Return home, Mr. Morgan. Forget what you saw. What happens to the horses? They'll be transported south. To Mexico. To buyers who pay well. Caleb looked at the mare tied near the forge. Her foal had become tangled in a loose rope. The mare fought against her restraint whenever the young animal struggled. One of the guards raised a branding iron. The foal screamed. Caleb's gelding shifted beneath him. Silas followed his gaze. They're livestock. They're stolen. Silas sighed. Heroism is expensive. So is hiring men who cannot tie a proper knot. Silas frowned. Caleb drew his revolver and fired once. The bullet did not strike a man. It severed the rope holding the frightened mare. She lunged toward her foal and knocked the branding guard into the water trough. The herd reacted instantly. Horses pressed against the western fence. Dust swallowed the basin. Caleb spurred his gelding down the narrow shelf before Silas's riders could block him. Gunfire cracked behind him. A bullet struck the canyon wall and sprayed his shoulder with stone. Caleb bent low over the saddle. He reached the northern fence, dismounted while the horse was still moving, and cut the rope around the trapped foal. The mare charged past him. The guard beside the forge reached for his rifle. Caleb kicked the burning iron into the water barrel. Steam exploded upward. The man stumbled back. Caleb grabbed the gate chain. It had been secured with a heavy lock. He fired into the metal once. The lock held. He fired again. The chain broke. Caleb pulled the gate open. At first, only the mare and foal escaped. Then 5 horses followed. Then 20. The entire herd began turning toward the opening. Men shouted from every side. Caleb climbed onto the bottom rail and slapped his hat against the timber. Come on. The first wave passed through the gate. The animals behind them followed by instinct. Within seconds, the canyon floor shook beneath nearly 800 hooves. Caleb mounted and rode beside the leading marries. He did not control the herd. No single rider could control 200 frightened horses inside a canyon. He merely showed them where the open ground waited. They poured through the northern wash. Silas's riders tried to circle ahead. The narrow trail forced them into a single line. Caleb turned and fired at a dead pine standing above the path. A broken limb crashed between the pursuing horses. No animal fell. But the obstruction bought Caleb several minutes. That was enough. The herd reached the open desert. Without fences pressing around them, the horses spread into a broad moving river. Caleb rode toward the red mesas in the north. He knew they would seek water by nightfall. If he could keep the leading marries on the correct trail, the rest might follow. The sun had nearly disappeared when a second rider joined him. Jonas Bell came over the ridge on a gray mule. The elderly foreman stared at the enormous herd. Then he looked at Caleb. You went out to inspect a water pump. I found horses. I can see that. 200 of them. Jonas removed his hat and wiped dust from his forehead. Of course you did. Caleb almost smiled. How did you find me? Gunshots carry. So does bad judgment. I followed both. Together, they guided the herd north. They found water at a shallow basin after midnight. Several horses had injured hooves. Others were dehydrated but still strong enough to travel. Caleb and Jonas worked until dawn, removing broken ropes and checking the younger animals. They found the Red Willow mark beneath altered brands on nearly every adult horse. These animals had not been abandoned. They had been stolen as a single deliberate act. By the second evening, 20 riders appeared along the northern ridge. Caleb reached for his rifle. Then he noticed something unusual. Every rider was a woman. They descended in 2 disciplined lines. Some carried bows. Others held rifles or long spears. At their center rode a tall Apache woman on a dark chestnut mare. Her long black hair had been tied behind her shoulders. Turquoise beadwork decorated the collar of her fitted tan buckskin dress. She appeared to be close to 30, but her expression carried the exhaustion of someone who had been responsible for too many lives at once. Her gaze moved across the horses. Then she saw an older black stallion near the water. The control in her face broke. She dismounted and crossed the basin. The stallion lifted its head. The woman gave a low 2-note whistle. The animal walked directly toward her. She pressed her forehead against its nose. For several seconds, the armed women watched in silence. Caleb lowered his rifle. The woman turned toward him. "Where did you find them?" "Copper Ridge." "Who held them?" "Men working for Silas Vane." A murmur passed through the riders. The woman's expression hardened. "How many men did you kill?" "None." "You took 200 horses from armed thieves without killing anyone?" "I opened a gate." Jonas cleared his throat. He also got shot at more times than he intends to admit. The woman studied Caleb. "My name is Nayeli. Caleb Morgan. I know your ranch." He glanced toward the armed riders. "Should I be worried about that?" "Not today." Nayeli examined the herd. Several women began recognizing individual horses. One embraced the neck of a small painted mare. Another found 2 ponies belonging to her sons. Tears appeared without weakening their guarded posture. Nayeli pointed toward the damaged brands. "They tried to erase our mark. They were preparing to sell the herd in Mexico. These horses are not only wealth." "I understand." "No," her voice remained controlled. "I do not think you do." She gestured toward the women behind her. "Our hunters followed a false military order into the eastern mountains. They have been gone 11 days. Caleb looked at the horses again. "Without them, the community could not follow." Nayeli continued. "We use these animals to carry water from the northern spring. We hunt with them. We move the sick. We trade food before winter." Silas knew that. "Yes. What does he want?" "The spring." Nayeli explained that Vane's company had offered to purchase Red Willow Valley 3 times. The elders refused. Soon afterward, territorial notices appeared claiming the community owed grazing fees. Then the supply wagons stopped arriving. Finally, the horses vanished. The theft was not meant to make Silas richer. It was meant to make the Apache settlement impossible to sustain. Caleb looked toward the women. "Take the herd home." Nayeli did not move. "You recovered them. They belong to your people. You lost men and ammunition. I lost 2 bullets and a day of fence work. Vane will come after you. He already planned to." Caleb removed the broken lead ropes from his saddle and placed them on the ground. "I'm not asking for payment." The women exchanged uneasy glances. Something about his answer frightened them more than a demand would have. Nayeli walked back to her riders. They spoke quietly in Apache. Caleb understood none of the words. He understood the fear behind them. Finally, the 20 women dismounted. They placed their bows, rifles, and spears carefully on the ground. Then they formed a line before Caleb. Nayeli stood at the center. "You returned what keeps our families alive. That was the idea. We cannot repay the value of 200 horses. You don't have to. A debt remains whether the creditor names it or not. Caleb looked toward Jonas. The older man appeared equally confused. Nayeli removed a folded document from her saddlebag. It carried the territorial seal and the signature of a freight agent. The agreement says that if an outsider recovers property abandoned by our settlement, the value must be paid in land, silver, labor, or service. Caleb accepted the paper. He read it twice. The legal language looked official. The meaning beneath it was monstrous. Silas had not merely stolen the horses. He had written a contract designed to turn their return into another weapon. Caleb handed it back. This agreement is false. The seal is real, Nayeli said. Then someone purchased a real seal. Our land is protected by the elders. We have no silver. Our remaining livestock must feed the children. Caleb felt a cold weight settle inside his chest. Nayeli raised her head. Pride remained in her voice even as the words wounded her. The horses saved our families. We have nothing equal to give. The other women lowered their eyes. Nayeli looked directly at Caleb. Now we are yours. The desert became silent. Even Jonas seemed to stop breathing. Caleb stepped away from the line. No, Nayeli's expression tightened. You refuse the debt. I refuse the idea that you are payment. You risked your life. That does not purchase yours. The agreement is a lie written by a man who hoped you would be too desperate to challenge it. Nayeli watched him closely. Men do not usually reject power when it is offered. You didn't offer it. Caleb pointed toward the document. Silas cornered you and called the result a choice. The women slowly raised their eyes. Caleb unbuckled his gun belt and placed it beside their weapons. The horses belong to your people. He looked from one woman to the next. You belong to no man. Nayeli said nothing for a long moment. Relief did not enter her face. Suspicion did. Why should we trust you? You shouldn't. His answer surprised her. Not yet. Caleb gestured toward the altered brands. Trust what you can prove. These horses were held in Vane's Canyon. His men changed the marks. His freight wagons used the southern trail. Nayeli knelt beside one mare and rubbed the dust beneath its fetlock. A red powder stained her fingers. She smelled it. Copper ore. From the mine. Only Copper Ridge carries this color. Jonas examined a saddle blanket and pulled a small lead seal from its torn edge. The letter V had been stamped into the metal. Caleb held it up. That connects the herd to Vane. It proves his equipment was near the horses, Nayeli replied. Not that he ordered the theft. Caleb heard the challenge in her voice. He respected it. What would prove it? His records. Where are they kept? At the mining camp. Jonas gave Caleb a weary look. Before you ask, no, two men cannot enter a guarded camp and steal a company ledger. Caleb turned toward Nayeli. How many can? She looked at the 19 women behind her. 20. The Red Willow settlement stood beside a dwindling spring beneath a line of cottonwoods. Children ran toward the returning horses before the riders reached the first shelter. Mothers embraced sons who had believed their ponies were gone forever. Elder Tahoma examined the false agreement beneath the firelight. He was nearly 70, with silver hair tied at his neck and a voice that never needed to become loud. Our people have no law that exchanges human freedom for recovered property. Nayeli looked toward Caleb. The document used words none of us could fully read. That was intentional, Caleb said. Tahoma nodded. Silas used the appearance of law to hide theft. A young boy entered the shelter. His face was pale. My father's horse returned. Nayeli knelt in front of him. Then your father may still be alive. The boy held out a strip of cloth found beneath the saddle. Dark stains covered one end. Nayeli recognized the blue stitching. It belonged to her younger brother. The missing hunters had not followed a military order. They had been taken. Before midnight, Nayeli selected 8 women to accompany her into Copper Ridge. Caleb prepared his horse. She approached him beside the spring. "You have returned the herd. You owe us nothing more." "I know." "Then why are you saddling?" "Because Silas knows I found the horses. That makes this dangerous." "It was dangerous before I arrived." Nayeli folded her arms. "I will lead." Caleb handed her the map he had drawn of the mining basin. "You know the land. Tell me where you need me." For the first time, her guarded expression softened. "Ride behind me." "Gladly." They reached Copper Ridge shortly before dawn. From a high ledge, they saw armed guards moving between the mine buildings. A group of exhausted Apache men carried timber near the lower shaft. Chains connected several of them by the ankles. Nayeli found her brother among them. Her hand tightened around the knife at her waist. Caleb touched her wrist gently. "Not yet." She looked at him. He released her immediately. Nayeli studied the camp. A record office stood beside the line shack. The ledger they needed would be inside. She divided the group. 4 women would free the prisoners. 2 would secure the horses. Jonas would block the southern road. Caleb would enter the record office with Nayeli. They descended through an abandoned drainage cut. The plan worked for 7 minutes. That was enough to open the prisoners' chains. It was not enough to escape. A rifle shot echoed through the camp. Lanterns ignited across the buildings. Men appeared on every ridge. Silas Vane stepped from the record office holding the company ledger beneath one arm. He had been waiting. Behind him, guards dragged burning torches toward the hay enclosure. 200 recovered horses had been secretly followed and driven into a lower holding field while Red Willow slept. Silas smiled at Caleb. "I wondered whether you would bring them back to me." Nayeli looked toward the crowded enclosure. "You used him to find our settlement." "No," Silas replied. "I used his conscience." He raised the ledger. "By sunrise, this book will show that Caleb Morgan and 20 Apache women stole every horse from my company." Caleb glanced toward the gates. The lowest timbers were already bowing under the pressure of frightened animals. Nayeli saw the danger before anyone else. "If that fence breaks, the herd will run through the prisoners." Silas dropped a torch into the hay. Flames spread beneath the dry roof. The horses screamed. Caleb reached for the nearest gate chain. A deep crack split the center post. Nayeli climbed onto her mare. She looked toward Caleb through the smoke. "If that gate breaks, they'll trample everyone below." Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. "Then tell me where to ride." The post broke. And 200 terrified horses surged toward the opening. The broken gate struck the ground. 200 frightened horses surged toward the opening. Nayeli saw 3 dangers at once. The chained prisoners stood directly below the holding field. The burning hay had cut off the western trail. And the herd's lead mare was turning toward the narrowest path in the camp. If the other horses followed her, they would crush every man trapped near the mine. Nayeli drove her chestnut mare across the slope. She did not ride toward the herd. She rode beside it. "Open the eastern fence," she shouted. Caleb looked through the smoke. The eastern fence bordered an empty drainage basin, but a second gate remained chained between 2 timber posts. 3 armed guards stood in front of it. Caleb spurred his horse forward. A guard raised his rifle. One of Nayeli's. Women threw a loop of rope over the weapon and pulled it from his hands. Another rider swept between the remaining men and forced them away from the gate without firing a shot. Caleb reached the chain. The lock was heavier than the one he had broken the day before. He could not waste ammunition against it. He wrapped the chain around his saddle horn and turned his gelding downhill. The horse leaned into the pull. The timber post groaned but remained upright. The herd thundered closer. Caleb looked toward Nayeli. She had reached the black lead stallion. The animal recognized her whistle, but fear had taken control of its body. Its eyes rolled white. Foam covered its bit. Nayeli guided her mare within several feet of him. Easy, Keem. The stallion struck the ground. A wall of horses pressed behind him. Nayeli gave the whistle again. 2 low notes. Then one higher sound. The stallion's ears turned toward her. That small movement was enough. Nayeli swung her mare east. Keem followed for 1 step. Then another. The first line of the herd began turning with him. Caleb urged his gelding forward again. The chain tightened. One hinge tore from the post. The gate twisted but did not open. Jonas appeared on the opposite side with a draft mule. He threw another rope around the upper rail. You always did enjoy making simple work difficult. Caleb tied the rope. Pull east. Both animals leaned into their harnesses. The post split down the center. The gate fell outward. Nayeli led Keem through the opening. The herd followed. Horses poured into the empty drainage basin instead of toward the prisoners. Dust and smoke swallowed the eastern half of the camp. Caleb remained beside the broken gate, guiding the last marries away from the fire. When the final foal passed him, he looked toward the mine. Nayeli's brother and the other prisoners had reached the drainage cut. But Silas's guards were closing around them. Nayeli handed Keem's direction to 2 women. Then she turned her mare back toward the camp. Caleb intercepted her. The herd needs you. My brother needs me. The horses know the basin now. He moved aside. You lead. They rode together toward the prisoners. Nayeli's women had no interest in a prolonged gunfight. They used the smoke, the buildings, and the abandoned mining equipment. One rolled an empty or cart down the central track. The guards scattered before it. Another cut loose the freight horses beside the record office. The confused animals blocked the southern road. Caleb dismounted behind a stack of timber. Nayeli crouched beside him. Silas still held the ledger. He had reached the office porch with 4 armed men. The prisoners remained trapped between the mine and the burning enclosure. We need that book, Caleb said. We need our people first. He nodded. Nayeli pointed toward an old water tower above the mine. Its wooden tank fed a pipe running along the roof of the office. The release wheel is beside the upper platform. You want to flood the camp? Only the center road. That water may be 20 years old. It does not need to taste good. Caleb almost smiled. I'll open it. No, Nayeli studied the guards surrounding the office. They expect you to attack Silas. What do they expect you to do? Obey. She removed her turquoise necklace and wrapped it inside a strip of cloth. Then she stepped from behind the timber with her hands visible. Silas raised his revolver. Stop there. Nayeli obeyed. The gunfire around the camp weakened. Several men turned toward her. Silas looked pleased. You finally understand your position. I understand yours. She glanced toward the smoke. You lost the herd. I can replace horses. You cannot replace that ledger. Silas tightened his grip around the book. Nayeli continued walking. You brought territorial contracts into this camp. Payment records. Land surveys. The names of every man you bribed. You think anyone will believe an Apache woman over me? No, her expression remained calm. That is why I need the book. Silas laughed. While every guard watched Nayeli, Caleb climbed the rear ladder of the water tower. Jonas reached the prisoners through the drainage cut. He used a hammer from the blacksmith shed to break the final chain. Nayeli's brother helped the weakest men toward cover. Silas did not notice. His attention remained fixed on Nayeli. "You could have survived this," he said. "Your people could have moved north. Beyond the mountains. There is land there. There is snow there. That is not my concern." Nayeli stopped 10 feet from the porch. "Our children would have gone hungry." Silas shrugged. "Children are born everywhere." The contempt in his voice silenced even his own men. Nayeli looked beyond him. Caleb had reached the release wheel. He waited. Not for his own judgment. For hers. Nayeli lowered her left hand. Caleb turned the wheel. Nothing happened. The old mechanism resisted. He braced both boots against the platform and pulled harder. Rust broke loose. The wheel moved. A deep groan came from inside the tank. Then the pipe above the record office burst. Hundreds of gallons of stale water crashed onto the roof. The force swept 2 guards from the porch and extinguished the burning hay beside the building. Mud spread across the central road. Nayeli charged. She struck Silas's wrist before he could fire. The revolver disappeared beneath the porch. Silas caught her arm and tried to pull her against him. Nayeli drove her knee into his thigh. He released her. She seized the ledger. A guard reached for it. Caleb dropped from the lower ladder between them. He struck the man's rifle aside with the water wheel handle. "Take the book," he shouted. Nayeli did not run toward the safety Caleb chose. She ran toward the route she had planned. 2 women waited behind the ore crusher. Nayeli handed the ledger to the first. That rider passed it to the second. Within seconds, the evidence was moving through the camp faster than Silas could follow. He shouted at his men. "Get that book." No one moved. The freed Apache prisoners had joined the women. Jonas and several miners blocked the southern road. The guards were surrounded. Not by an army. By the people Silas had assumed would remain afraid of one another. Silas backed toward the mine entrance. "You cannot hold this property." Caleb stepped beside Nayeli. "We don't want it." "Then what do you want?" Nayeli answered. "The truth." Silas pulled a small pistol from inside his boot. Caleb saw the movement. He reached for his revolver. Nayeli was faster. She kicked a shovel lying beside the porch. The wooden handle struck Silas's wrist. The pistol fell into the mud. Her brother picked it up. Silas looked at the prisoners. "You signed work agreements." One exhausted man lifted the chain still hanging from his ankle. "A contract does not need chains." The guards began lowering their weapons. Silas stared at them. "I pay you." A miner shook his head. "You paid us to guard horses. Not families." Another man removed his gun belt and dropped it. The others followed. By sunrise, the fire had been extinguished. Every horse remained inside the eastern basin. 3 suffered minor cuts from the broken fence. None had been killed. The prisoners received water, food, and blankets. Nayeli sat beside her younger brother while Elder Tahoma's riders treated the wounds around his ankles. His name was Ashkiai. He had lost weight during captivity, but his voice remained strong. "They told us the women had abandoned Red Willow." Nayeli looked toward the 20 riders organizing the herd. They underestimated the women. Ashkiai followed her gaze to Caleb. "And him?" "I have not decided yet." Caleb overheard her. "That seems fair." Silas Vane was tied to the office post with the same rope once used to hold the lead stallion. Nayeli opened the ledger on a dry crate. The records revealed more than horse theft. Silas had paid a territorial clerk to create the false debt agreement. He had bribed 2 freight agents to stop food deliveries to Red Willow. He had sold 50 Apache horses months earlier under altered brands. The missing hunters had been taken after discovering survey markers near the northern spring. A folded map showed why Silas wanted the valley. A railroad company planned to build a supply station within 5 miles. Whoever controlled the spring would control water for the construction camps, cattle herds, and future settlement. Silas had not been stealing land worth hundreds of dollars. He had been positioning himself to control land worth thousands. Jonas examined the payment pages. Men have been hanged on less evidence. Nayeli closed the book. We take it to Cedar Crossing. Caleb looked toward Silas. He owns half the men in that town. Not the other half. The journey took most of the day. Nayeli insisted that the 200 horses travel first. The freed men followed. Silas rode inside his own freight wagon under guard. As they approached Cedar Crossing, residents gathered along the road. The sight stopped every conversation. 200 horses filled the valley from one fence line to the other. Apache women rode at the front. Caleb traveled beside them, not ahead. Silas Vane sat behind iron bars intended for stolen livestock. The territorial deputy stepped from the sheriff's office. What is the meaning of this? Silas stood inside the wagon. Arrest that man. He pointed toward Caleb. He and those women stole my herd and attacked my mine. The deputy looked at Caleb. Caleb did not answer. He turned toward Nayeli. The story belonged to her. Nayeli dismounted with the ledger beneath one arm. These horses carry the Red Willow mark beneath wounds made by Vane's branding irons. She showed the deputy the altered scars. These men were held at Copper Ridge and forced to work while their families were told they had disappeared. Ashki and the other prisoners stepped forward with broken chains. Silas gripped the wagon bars. They owed grazing fees. Elder Tahoma rode into town behind the herd. He carried the false agreement. This document was presented as territorial law. The deputy examined the seal. A nervous man began moving away from the courthouse. Jonas recognized him from the ledger. That's your clerk. 2 ranchers blocked the man's path. Nayeli placed the ledger on a hitching post. She opened it to the list of payments. At first, no one spoke. Then Samuel Price, a rancher from the Eastern Valley, stepped closer. He examined one of the brands. That mare belonged to my brother. Another rancher recognized 3 geldings sold to him by Vane Freight. A Mexican trader found the identification numbers of horses he had purchased legally, unaware they had been stolen. Silas's scheme had not targeted only the Apache community. He had built an entire business from manufacturing desperation. People who had remained silent when the victims were strangers now discovered their own names inside the same crime. The deputy closed the ledger. Silas Vane, you are under arrest for theft, unlawful confinement, fraud, and conspiracy to seize protected land. Silas stared at him. I paid your sheriff. The sheriff left town this morning. Then wait until he returns. The deputy looked toward the gathering crowd. I don't think he intends to. Silas was taken from the wagon. As he passed Nayeli, he lowered his voice. You think they respect you now? She met his stare. No, she looked toward the people examining the evidence. But they can no longer pretend they did not hear me. Silas's trial began 3 weeks later. The ledger survived every attempt to discredit it. The territorial seal on the false agreement matched a stamp found inside the missing clerk's office. Miners testified about the prisoners. Ranchers identified stolen horses. Freight workers admitted changing brands under Silas's orders. The court convicted him on every major charge. His mining lease was revoked. His freight company was dissolved. The stolen horses and seized funds were returned to their rightful owners. The Northern Spring received protected status under an agreement witnessed by Red Willow elders, local ranchers, and territorial officials. No single company could purchase or block access to it. Justice did not repair every injury. It did not return the weak stolen from the prisoners. It did not erase the brands cut into the horses. But it ended Silas's power to continue the harm. Winter arrived early. Caleb returned to Hollow Creek Ranch expecting silence. Instead, he found 20 Apache women waiting beside his damaged northern fence. Nayeli sat on her chestnut mare at their center. Several women carried hammers. Others had fence posts, rope, and food. Caleb stopped his horse. "What happened?" "You said you lost a day of fence work," Nayeli replied. "You don't owe me labor." "We know. Then why are you here?" Nayeli glanced toward the women. "That is why we came." The answer settled something inside him. They were not fulfilling a contract. They were choosing friendship. Caleb dismounted. "What do you need?" Nayeli handed him a post driver. "For you. To stop talking and help." By sunset, the northern fence stood straighter than it had in years. The women shared supper with Caleb, Jonas, and the ranch hands. No one lowered a weapon before him. No one offered service as payment. They sat at the same table. In the following months, Hollow Creek and Red Willow built a shared horse station near the spring. Nayeli designed 3 separate water channels. One supplied the community. Another filled a stone trough for horses and cattle. The third allowed deer and other wildlife to drink without entering the settlement. Caleb provided timber and tools. Red Willow provided knowledge of the land. Neither side claimed ownership of the water. The 20 women formed a patrol to protect the valley's trails. They tracked missing livestock. Escorted supply wagons. Guided lost travelers. And recorded every animal entering or leaving the territory. The people who had once been treated as payment became the guardians of the valley's most valuable resource. Caleb and Nayeli worked beside each other through spring. Their affection did not arrive in a dramatic confession. It grew through smaller moments. Nayeli learned Caleb always gave the best grain to an aging horse he claimed to dislike. Caleb discovered she sang quietly while repairing saddles. She corrected his Apache words without mercy. He made the same mistakes often enough that she suspected they were deliberate. One evening, they sat beside the northern spring after finishing the final section of the stone trough. The setting sun turned the water copper. The 200 horses grazed beyond the cottonwoods. Caleb held a folded land agreement. Nayeli noticed it. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing successfully." He handed her the paper. It was not a deed transferring Hollow Creek to her. It was a partnership agreement. The ranch and Red Willow would share responsibility for the horse station, but neither could sell the spring or restrict the other's access. Nayeli read every line. "You had this written in both languages. I wanted everyone to understand before signing. Silas used words to remove choice. I thought we could use them to protect it." She folded the document carefully. "Is this why you brought me here?" "Partly." "What is the other reason?" Caleb looked toward the horses. He had faced armed thieves more easily than the woman sitting beside him. "I have spent most of my life believing that protecting someone meant standing in front of them." Nayeli waited. "You taught me that sometimes it means standing beside them and listening. That lesson took you several months." "I'm a rancher. We are not known for speed." She smiled. Caleb's voice softened. "I want a life with you, Nayeli." He did not offer land as though she needed to be purchased. He did not promise to rescue her from her own people. He simply placed his open hand on the stone between them. "If you choose another road, the agreement remains. The water remains protected. Nothing changes." Nayeli looked at his hand. Then at his face. I will never walk behind you. I would worry you were planning something. I will never stand beneath you. I wouldn't ask. She placed her hand inside his. I will walk beside you. Caleb closed his fingers gently around hers. Beside me is the only place I ever wanted you. They married beneath the cottonwoods at the end of spring. Apache families and ranchers built long tables near the water. Jonas wore a clean shirt for the first time anyone could remember. Ashkiai stood with his sister. Elder Tahoma offered the blessing. The 20 women arrived on horseback and formed 2 lines along the trail. Before the ceremony, Tahoma looked toward Caleb. When these women first stood before you, they offered what no person had the right to receive. A quiet understanding moved through the crowd. Nayeli looked at the women who had once lowered their weapons. Then she faced Caleb. They said, "Now we are yours." Caleb shook his head. Nayeli smiled. "No," her voice carried across the spring. "We were never his." She looked toward Red Willow, the ranchers, the freed prisoners, and the children playing beside the newly protected water. But he became one of us. Caleb did not receive 20 women as a reward. He received their trust. He received a place beside their fire. And he received the freely given love of a woman who had never surrendered her right to choose. 1 year later, the 200 horses ran across Red Willow Valley. The altered brands had healed, though faint scars remained. Those marks were no longer symbols of ownership. They were reminders of what happened when powerful men mistook desperation for consent. Nayeli rode at the front of the herd. Caleb followed several lengths behind until she looked over her shoulder. "You are supposed to ride beside me." He urged his horse forward. "I was waiting for instructions." "You follow them poorly." But eventually. They rode together as the herd spread across the open grassland. There were no chains. No false contracts. No locked gates. And no person in Red Willow Valley belonged to anyone else. They belonged only to themselves. And by choice, they belonged beside one another.